Hello, everybody, and welcome to the series. We are here today. I'm Allison Kennedy, and I'm here with Marty. We're here to discuss ingesting and transforming data in Microsoft Fabric. This is a live session, and so we've got some people joining us. Feel free to pop your questions in the chat, say hello. And we're also going to be available on demand too. So if we go too fast, you can catch up on that later. Marty, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alison. I'm Martin Catherall. Hello, great to be here. Data engineer, SQL Server person, and now a Fabric person too. So I'm enjoying this, and I'll hand you over to Alison to introduce herself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Alison. I'm joining from Auckland, New Zealand today, and I am a data insights analyst. And so coming from an Excel Power BI background and moving into the fabric engineering space. So excited to be joining you guys today and sharing what we've got. We've got our moderators with us as well. So they'll be answering questions in the chats. So shout out to them, and don't be shy. Put all your questions in the chats, and they'll be filtering some of those through to us. If we've got time at the end of the show for questions, we'll be taking questions live only. So thanks to the moderators, and let's get started, shall we? So today we are looking at, this is episode 2. So for those of you that joined us yesterday, welcome back. Today we're looking at the second set of skills that is part of the DP-700 Fabric Data Engineer exam, which is, I think it's about 30 to 35% of the exam is made up of ingesting and transforming the data within Microsoft Fabric. Tomorrow you can join us for monitoring and optimizing solutions. And in person, if you're looking for some good networking, we've got this opportunity. And Marty, I believe you went to this last year, is that right?
I did indeed, Alison. Yeah, it was the inaugural event last year. Very good event and very well attended. One of the highlights for me, obviously, apart from the content, was the community zone. So there were members of the PG teams, the product groups, lots of MVPs there available to answer people's questions. And yeah, that drew a lot of attention from the attendees. So yeah, I look forward to seeing people there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I missed it last year because I went to another conference 2 weeks before, and I can't get that much time away from work, but I heard fantastic things. So definitely don't miss out on it this year if you have the capability to get to Vegas for that. All right, so looking at the DP-700, there is a 50% discount code for the exam. Now this is limited, so it's only available until the end of March. So go to this AKA link to register for that 50% discount code. Save yourself some money when you're taking the exam. Yeah, half price, can't beat that. Like we said, this is live, interactive. Say hello, tell us where you're from, ask questions in the chat. Let us know, what you're doing, what you're joining us from. Like I said, this is episode 2. So we're looking at the second set of skills of ingesting and transforming data. And what we're going to cover today is aiming kind of at a transition from what was covered in the DP-203, which I believe is being phased out. Marty, do you know if I'm right on that?
Yeah, it is. It's going to be retired at some point, I believe pretty soon. So this series is just aimed at, making people aware of what was on the DPS3 and how it's going to transition to 700. So very much a comparable set of features. Obviously, we moved from Azure to Fabric, but most of the concepts people should find relatively intuitive.
Yeah, most of the stuff, it's not like they've totally reinvented the wheel. So the concepts are still the same. Even the UI is very, very similar for most of it. So it should look familiar. If you have the DP-203 skill, the DP-700 should be well achievable. It's just about dusting off the cobwebs and filling in maybe a couple of gaps. We're going to cover a few different topics today. If we have a look at the next slide, there's a slightly different focus from the DP-203 to the DP-700. So whereas the DP-203 was, as Marty said, it was Azure, it kind of covers the end-to-end of managing the entire, data engineering across the entire Azure suite, whereas the DP-700 streamlines that a little bit. And we're going to look at the details in the next slide. So the DP-203 was broken down into 3 areas. DP-700 also broken down into 3 core areas, but streamlining more into that analytics engineering focus. Would you have any other insights to add, Marty, on kind of the differences between the two?
Yeah, I guess we'll drill into them as we go along, but obviously the first section there, so in DP-203, we had about designing and implementing data storage. We've still got, it's still the same kind of title in Microsoft Fabric, just a little bit more expanded. And the last section there about securing and monitoring and optimizing is kind of the same going into Microsoft Fabric. Same kind of weighting, just different kind of concepts. So I think we covered that pretty well, Alison.
Wonderful. All right, shall we get into the content? Yeah, I think we've covered this pretty well, haven't we? And again, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for those at the end, but moderators are answering those if you're joining us live. So yeah, let's get started. We're going to start with an introduction to Microsoft Fabric. Marty, if you could sum up Fabric in a sentence or less, how would you do it?
Yeah, I think it's that SaaS platform, that software as a service, and it's bringing a lot of features that were previously all isolated within Azure. It's bringing them all together under that SaaS umbrella and making them available to customers in the same way as people, Power BI. People will be familiar with Power BI in the same way that we made those features available to clients and data visualization people. We're now making the whole package, the whole analytics package available as a software as a service system. So sorry, Alison, that was more than a sentence.
It's hard to do in a sentence, isn't it? I struggle, like anytime somebody asks me, what is this Fabric and why do I need it? I really like what you said with the umbrella term, though. I find that really helpful, and I'm a visual person. So having, I do sketchnoting as well. And so I've literally drawn Fabric as this umbrella, and there's like raindrops and thunderclouds above it. And Fabric is the umbrella that's kind of shielding and pulling together all of these tools into one spot. And it's a massive umbrella, right? So, as I said in my introduction, I've come from the Power BI side of things. Marty, you've kind of come at it from the other side of things, right? And here we are together.
Yeah, that's definitely right, Alison. And one of the things I do like about this, it brings like data visualization people like yourself into the same realm as hardcore data engineering people, and they can all use the same umbrella and collaborate. I point out one thing about this slide, which I really like about Fabric. It's that one lake. So the data storage kind of underlying the whole Fabric ecosystem. It can be used by any one of those experiences that are listed up the top, the data factory, engineering, and all that. And even Power BI, which is your skill set, I believe, Alison.
Yeah. And like it solves a lot of like issues that we've been having to build manual workarounds for, having to use lots of different disparate systems. It's, you know, bringing it into this one platform. And from my side of things, I love it. It's fantastic because it gives so much more visibility into that, you know, what's actually happening further upstream before I get the data. And I'm able to trust it a little bit more because I have a little bit more access and insight into what's actually going on in the data lineage and where it's all coming from, as well as being able to go in there and play around in the data engineering space myself as an analyst too, right? So
yeah, that's right, Alison. I guess you can see on this slide, you know, the whole picture really. And over to the left, you've got, like, we're going to call it mirroring, but you can ingest data in a lot of different ways. And they've called them the Fabric compute engines. I referred to them as experiences. You hear a lot of different language about experiences and compute engines, but effectively they're the same thing. And we can see them talking to their the various components on OneLake there, which is I like that. Sorry to interrupt you there, Alison.
No, this is great. Yeah. And the different languages, right? I think that's one of the reasons I struggle so much to sum up Fabric in one sentence, because depending, you kind of need to know who you're talking to tell them what's the part that's going to be the thing that they're most interested in. Because, you know, you've got the choice. You can use Spark, you can use T-SQL, you know, depending on what you're comfortable with, you're able to easily swap and change between them to do some of the same tasks, which this slide doesn't necessarily communicate as well. It looks like you have to choose T-SQL for data warehousing, but you do have a little bit of flexibility with that as well, right?
Yeah. So one of the things I really like about the Fabric on OneLake is you can virtualize data, which effectively means you can use it from the place where it is at the moment. So it doesn't necessarily have to exist in OneLake. It can exist in a multi-cloud environment in Amazon or Google. You know, it can exist on Azure as well, or in Dataverse. And I'm sure these shortcuts will get much more common and take in much more sources as we go forward. But that's one of the big strengths of Fabric, I think. So you could use Databricks and Fabric from the same source, for example. So I'd flick over to the next slide there, Alison, and can you tell us why Fabric?
Yeah, well, if we haven't sold you on it already, so Microsoft Fabric is this unified solution that helps you from the get data stage, doing the query and the prep, all the way to the analytics, and even including that Power BI. I think we're going to touch briefly on, you know, real-time event streaming. And then in the next episode tomorrow, you're going to see about the, you know, the monitoring of that side of things as well. So today we're focusing on the ingestion and kind of the transformations in the query and the prep of the data, and what that looks like within Microsoft Fabric and what tools you've got available. So we're looking at what this used to look like. So if you're coming from that Azure Synapse data factory background, Marty, are you a heavy SSIS?
Yeah. So I once upon a time I was dealt a lot with SSIS, sort of in the on-prem world. And I guess we're still taking data from on-prem sources. But as we moved into the cloud, into Azure, we started using things like Azure Data Factory, started using Synapse pipelines into the wider Synapse environment. And conversely, people who like using Power BI would use Power Query to accomplish like the same tasks. And now we've moved on a bit more, and we can use the data integration that's built into Fabric. So we've got a few choices to bring data in, to ingest it. And one of the bigger methods there is Data Factory, which is basically a cousin of Azure Data Factory, which morphed into Synapse pipelines and has now come into the Fabric ecosystem. So you got three things there that are very, very similar. And yeah, they do the similar sort of job to what Power Query would do, Azure Data Factory, and it enables, like, citizen developers, professional developers, low code, pro code people to accomplish the same thing. So,
are there any limitations with the Data Factory compared to like what you had with on-prem or what you have in Azure?
Yeah, well, I think I don't really want to compare it to the on-prem world, like the SSIS and that, like. Yeah. But I think the Data Factory capabilities within Fabric will improve over time. There's a lot there, and it does a lot of stuff at the moment. But if you compare it to, like, say, Azure Data Factory, it implements the base functionality, but it's probably over time going to be extended and encompass more and more technology and ways to transform and ingest data.
So looking at how we're loading data into Fabric, we talked about how there's options for everyone depending on, I said depending on what you know, right? Because that's kind of, I used to be a Microsoft certified trainer, and sometimes there's the best way and the right way to do things. And sometimes when people said, well, how do you do this? Should I use this or versus that? Sometimes my answer is, well, what are you more comfortable in? There's an option for everyone. So can you give us a little bit of a breakdown of the different storage options in Fabric, and what's your take on?
Yeah, sure can there, Alison. So I think most people would be familiar with the warehouse. So the warehouse is kind of SQL Server designed for large-scale warehousing, similar to Synapse serverless pools and also Synapse dedicated pools. So if you're going to create your star schema and munch through a lot of data there, that's probably the way to go. Now, with a warehouse,
right? Nicely structured data.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, your nicely structured data, and you can deal with T-SQL in that as well. Now, a lakehouse, probably a bit of a new concept for a lot of people.
It's where I go for vacation.
It is indeed. Very similar to a warehouse, but got a few additional options that it offers. You can't use T-SQL to change data. Now you can read with T-SQL, but you can't use SQL to change the data. For that, you've got to use Spark. So people tend to process data within the lakehouse with PySpark and Spark SQL. Just kind of, if your developers have got maybe a different bit of a skill set, that might be one reason to choose one thing over the other. And SQL database on Fabric has been introduced, I think, within about the last 6 months or so. Very similar to the Azure SQL database offering. And I think one of the drivers to bring that in is so that it's kind of built within the same ecosystem, and you don't have to go outside to the Azure ecosystem, to the PaaS offering to use a SQL database. I tend to use SQL database a lot for metadata management, whereas I would use a lakehouse or a warehouse a lot to actually store the data that I had ingested. So scenarios for each one, and I guess your mileage might vary. So you can work with a lakehouse in Fabric easily. Very, very similar to a warehouse. Create a notebook in here and use PySpark or Spark SQL, which is very kind of similar to CT SQL. Obviously, there are differences, but
so say I'm a data engineer that's like really comfortable with T-SQL, like what's my barrier for moving into the PySpark, and how difficult is that?
So to go from T-SQL into Spark SQL itself, that you're just going to be writing SQL. So when I say SQL, as an anti-standard SQL, which forms the basis of Spark SQL and T-SQL itself. T-SQL's obviously got a lot of proprietary extensions, which Spark SQL hasn't got. And conversely, Spark SQL's got some that T-SQL haven't got. You've got choices to manipulate the data. Like obviously I was talking about Spark SQL there. You can use PySpark, and there's some concepts within PySpark to like merge data sets or update a large amount of columns at one time that kind of don't exist in T-SQL. So it's kind of horses for courses. And I certainly encourage people to get to know the two sides of the same coin, so to speak, and make the judgment based on those. So you can work with a warehouse as well. So you can actually connect to the warehouse. Well, you can connect to a warehouse and a lakehouse through what we call a SQL Analytics endpoint, which is basically an endpoint that allows tools like Microsoft Management Studio and Azure Data Explorer to connect directly to the different data source, the lakehouse, the warehouse, the SQL database, directly through tools that people know, love, and have used throughout their careers.
And do I get that SQL endpoint automatically, or is there any extra setup that I need to do to enable that?
No, that SQL endpoint comes automatically. Once you create a lakehouse or you create a warehouse or a SQL database, yeah, you'll automatically get the SQL endpoint. And from that SQL endpoint, you'll be able to use any of those data stores, which is quite fantastic, really.
It's really cool, right? So I can still use the tools that I'm familiar with, but have the benefits of Fabric as well at the same time.
Exactly. And we've got on the screen at the moment a screenshot of Dataflow Gen 2s. Kind of, and most people might look at this and think Power Query. Actually, I'm going to back up a bit. This is actually a visual query, but it's very, very similar to the Power Query interface, the visual drag and drop. And now we see some SQL tables that you can drag on in another environment. And you can access the tables there, a traditional view of just the data displayed in a tabular format. I use the term tabular very loosely as to mean rows and columns of data, as you might see in SQL Server, Management Studio, or Azure Data Factory. Yeah. And you can, did you notice, Alison, that you can hook up all of your assets within Fabric to source control?
Yeah, tell me more about that, because this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where some of the stuff that used to feel really hard, and we had to use lots of different systems to work through. It's now really easy within Fabric. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So once you set up your workspace, you get the option to link the workspace up directly to either a Azure DevOps repository, or you can link it up to a Git repo. And that's fairly easy. The screenshot that we're seeing at the minute, you can see like there's a source control button there, and it's at the moment telling me there's 8 items that have been changed and are up for going into source control. So yeah, pretty seamless environment. You can see the source control pop out has come up there. You've got a button down the bottom to commit. You can commit to your branch if you've made, well, you will have made one. Commit directly to your branch, and your code is all nice and safely in source control, whatever you are wanting to use. So there's various tools and techniques you've got to explore these, Alison, and I guess you would be familiar with some of these, like myself, and probably less familiar with other ones.
Yeah, we've talked about a few of these. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Dataflows. Like you said, that's kind of Power Query on steroids, really. But I'm sure it's a lot more than that, and possibly looks familiar to something in the Azure world, or maybe not. I don't know where it originated.
Yeah. I think people who come from the Power Query world will be more familiar with the Dataflow Gen 2 visual interface. Also, for people who are not really that familiar with writing code, they get to a drag and drop interface where they can merge data or join data rather than write, say, queries that they wanted to write. People often ask, like, oh, so what's the difference between Dataflow Gen 2 and data pipelines? Where might I use one over the other? So data pipelines, in this sense here, really kind of fabric, and Gen 2s or Dataflow Gen 2s really kind of, that Power Query interface. And again, similar to the Lakehouse Warehouse conversation, it's going to really depend on what your developers are familiar with, in one sense. In another sense, say Gen 2 might be able to connect to different data sources that maybe the pipelines can't. As an example, I think last year, and this may have changed now, I found that I could connect to a data source, a Google Analytics data source with Dataflows Gen 2, and I was unable to do that with pipelines. So that might be an example of when I wanted to use data flows over pipelines. I'm sure you've run into things like that yourself, Alison.
Yeah, and if we have a look at the next slide, there's a third player in the field too to throw in the mix. But the Dataflow Gen 2s, like you said, it's that drag and drop interface. So you can see here the code written can be no code, but equally you can write the code from scratch if you're comfortable using M. Is the primary language of the Dataflow Gen 2, but you can use your SQL skill sets in there as well. So
Yep. And I see this slide lists out the data pipeline copy activity, which is probably one of the more common activities in Data Factory. Effectively, you've just got to configure your source and you've got to configure your destination. And as an example, if you were to take data from a SQL Server table, which is obviously in that SQL Server format, you can transfer that over to maybe, say, a data parquet file pretty seamlessly. And that data parquet format is the format that OneDrive really likes and can be read by all of those Fabric engines and those experiences. So that's one to look out for. Obviously, there's many, many different activities within the data pipeline. Dataflow Gen 2s, obviously, we mentioned about Power Query. Spark is a big one for me, and this was a bit of a learning curve for me. Obviously, this is in Synapse as well. So people coming from the Synapse world will probably be familiar with this. Pretty much the same going on there. You can use whichever version you see fit to use there, and you can ingest data with it as well. Now, it may be easy to use a pipeline or a Dataflow Gen 2, but I'll give you an example of where Spark might be good for ingestion. I was working with a client who had a Excel file, and they just wanted the data read in from the Excel file. And now I 100% agree here. You could just use Dataflow Gen 2 for that, and it'd be fine. But people wanted to manipulate this file all the time at will, and I got them to just drop it into.
Dangerous. Excel files are dangerous, right? If you're wanting that manipulation and
people have got I guess people and companies have got their own way of working that they've had for many, many years, and they want to keep it up. So basically, we set them up with a folder in a Lakehouse, and they just drop the Excel file in there. I was able to then use a Spark notebook. I would just pick that Excel file up and read the various worksheets within it using Python, using PySpark, transfer that to a Spark data set, and really write out a Delta Parquet file from there that could be, consumed by Power BI or one of the other engines. So gives you another option. I think probably mainly the Spark would be used for transformation. So once you've landed the data and you might want to transform it in different ways, maybe capitalize things or add names together or do some sort of transformation. I think that's more where the Spark would come in.
And for that data scientist role as well, right? Because you've got the Python and the R and that capability built in.
Yes, definitely. So with the Spark, so we obviously said Spark here, but when you create a notebook, you have the opportunity to use like PySpark or Spark SQL, and you can also use R and Scala as well in there. So you've got a variety of languages that you can use.
Yeah, because we've got that row that's got the development interface, right? So with the Dataflow Gen 2, you're kind of using Power Query. Talked about how maybe Power Query on steroids. With Spark, you've got the notebook as your development interface. But as you've demonstrated, the data sources that we can connect to ingest is the same with any of these options, right? So
yeah, that's great. And there's a link there at the bottom of the slide where people can go to find out more about the various decisions that they might have to make within, within ingesting data or transforming data. There are a lot of options, Alison, and it's just like choosing the right one for your scenario.
And it's not always going to be one way fits all, right? So
yeah, that's right. There might be multiple ways to do any one thing. And that might depend on the skill set you've got available, the performance, or any number of factors. But maybe do you want to push on and we'll do the ingest and transforming streaming data?
Yeah, streaming data is fun, real time.
Yeah, so with streaming data, it's becoming a lot more popular. Batch data, obviously, data that's just static and being read at a particular time. That's been, I'd say, the most popular way, the most popular data source. But there's more and more companies now providing real-time feeds. I'm thinking electricity companies, electricity meters, utility meters. They're probably the biggest example.
Now, can I interrupt you? When you say real time, because I have a lot of clients that say, hey, I want real-time live data. And I ask them, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, daily, hourly, right? So when we're talking real time, we're actually talking real time.
Yeah, so the example you just mentioned there, I think people just want to say the data that comes across instantly. And the examples you maybe give there are people bringing batch data across and they want to see it maybe straight away. They don't want it to get stale. What I mean here by real-time intelligence is a feed that is constantly, like, it never ends. It's just going all the time, firing bits of data over to an endpoint within Fabric that might be, how much data, how much electricity your house is using this minute, then how much data, how much it's using the next minute, next second, or whatever. Just a constant stream of data that's going to be ingested with Fabric. And Fabric provides a real-time environment to do this, as Power BI used to, but the KQL is what is here, a KQL database, and that allows you to analyze the data as it is landed. So as it comes in, you might say, show me the patterns that have emerged over the last 5 minutes, and you've got a rolling 5-minute window going forward where you could see changes and put in some sort of machine learning there or some sort of analytics to detect patterns and outliers and that type of thing. So really ingesting event streams it is quite straightforward. We see a layout on the screen. This isn't Power Query, but it's very similar to that environment. On the left, we can see our actual stream that's coming in. And on the right, which is not quite there in this graphic, we'll see ways to land that data. Like, you're probably going to land it in a data store, in this case a KQL data store, and in the middle you might have some transactions going on. So you knew that in Power, but you could do that in Power BI previously. And Alison, is that correct?
Yeah, but Fabric gives you some more options, and I think it makes it easier. So like I was working with a client who got access to a Fabric trial license, and he's never used Power BI before. He's not a data engineer. He's tech savvy, but he's like the manager. He's not the developer. And within a couple of hours, he had connected to a live event stream and gone through this whole process. And that's how intuitive it is for, being able to connect into that, get, as you said, the 5-minute trends. And then you can even, you could do alerts in Power BI before, but Fabric has made it a lot easier, and it's integrated it more deeply to the data source rather than forcing you to do that at the endpoint at that reporting stage. Which
that's definitely correct. So Fabric's got something called Activator, which can show you real-time alerts based on your actual data. So you might want to alert if you see some kind of outlier, or you might want to alert if things are okay. For any number of reasons, you might want to send some sort of alert, and you can do that with the Activator within Microsoft Fabric. So yeah, we talk about Power BI there. You've obviously very similar. You can actually create real-time dashboards within the KQL experience, so not Power BI, but you can also create them within Power BI itself.
Yeah, so it's like pulling Power BI into your notebook or the data, or pulling the data into the Power BI.
Well, I think basically you've got a choice. It's either you can do one or the other. You've got your stream of data coming in from wherever it's coming in from. Now the KQL itself offers an experience where you could say write a query. Obviously, you can see the query in tabular format, rows and columns, but you can also visualize that on a tile. So it's very similar to Power BI. It's just a different way of doing it. However, you can accomplish pretty much the same thing or something very similar within Power BI itself.
Well, and that's what I really like about, and I think our next slide talks about Activator. With the way Power BI used to be, you needed a tile or a visualization that was focused only on one metric to be able to set alerts on. But now with Activator, you can set an alert on any visualization that you're using in the Power BI world. It doesn't have to be focused in on that one metric. So the interface is really intuitive, and you can select which metric you want to look at within that visual, define the rules, trigger actions. I think it even connects, it has connectors into the Power Platform. Somehow I've managed to get it to send emails and Teams alerts and do all sorts of other things, right? So I'm not that big on the Power Platform itself, but obviously there's quite a lot of integration within all these Microsoft tools. But I think the language of like this is very simple to kind of intuitive as well. You get an event, you've got an object, you set rules around when you get the alert, and you can get the alert, say for example by email, but there's a number of other methods that can be used, like Teams or whatever you want to use there. So there is actually a real-time hub to manage this. So within Fabric, it's like a lightning bolt. Have you seen that, Alison? Yeah.
I know. It's probably one of the later Fabric experiences that I delved into. But yeah, it's easy to find. And yeah, like anything, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's very, very intuitive to use. And Microsoft provide a lot of sample ingestion streams. So you can just hook up to one. So you don't have to, if you're developing or you're just experimenting, you don't have to go create your own stream. You can actually hook up to one of the streams that are already there and use that. So what are we on next there, Alison?
Loading patterns.
Oh, designing and implementing loading patterns.
So
You
how do
are
we
quite
get
right.
stuff in?
Okay, so we just spent quite a long time talking about real time. So obviously that is one of the loading patterns that's here. And so as the data comes in, you can take action on it and either put it in a real-time dashboard, squirrel it away in a database somewhere. You've got a lot of choices there. I guess on the other side of the coin, we've got batch data. So data that's like static somewhere, whether it's sitting in an on-prem SQL database, an Azure SQL database, an Oracle store, whatever it is, but it's kind of static data. So at a specific point in time, we load that data into our Fabric environment, so we can load everything, like a full load. So everything that's at the source, we're taking it, we're ingesting it, and we're placing it into Fabric. And typically you'd want to do that, the first time you ever load anything. But you also might want to do it at various intervals to maybe check your source is in sync with what is in Fabric. However, occasionally you'll want to do incremental loads. So maybe every day. So, maybe initially a company has got, say, a terabyte of data, but they don't want to bring a terabyte of data across every day. They only add every, day, say 3 or 4 gigs of data. So all they want to do now is incrementally load those 3 or 4 gigs of data into their Fabric lakehouse or warehouse. And we call that incremental loading. And I guess that's a pretty similar concept to what Power BI developers know, Alison.
Yeah, it's the same thing we have in Power BI with the incremental refresh or the full refresh or the real-time data. But having it loaded into Fabric, in, like you said, that one lake gives you a huge performance advantage.
Yeah, definitely. And so where you're maybe limited to your refreshes in Power BI, you're not limited at all to the refreshes you can have in Fabric. You could run your pipeline as often as you like. I guess your only limitations there is you don't want to be starting the next run of your pipeline before the previous one is finished. So obviously you have to take that on a case-by-case basis. So yeah, we've got a few different options for our various loading types there. Do you want to tell us about them, Alison, at all?
Yeah, so this is just looking at implementing the different loading patterns into Microsoft Fabric, and you'll see some overlap. So notebooks is, if you love notebooks, you're going to love Fabric because they've gone all in on the notebooks. And I didn't know what a notebook was 3 years ago, and as I started learning all this Fabric stuff and they started demoing notebooks to me, my brain was exploding and it looked really confusing, and it's this new environment. But I'm like, oh, actually notebooks are really cool because they do everything for you, really good with the documentation and the doing and the testing. So yeah, I'm learning to love notebooks.
They are very good. The way you've got different cells for people who've not seen them. You've just got different cells. You can actually write code in one cell. You can document in maybe another cell using like HTML, but you're definitely right there about the overlap. Not something I'd thought about too much myself, Alison. I see there, you can use notebooks for everything, which is quite self-explanatory. Dataflows Gen 2s or Data Factory can be used for either the full load or the incremental load. And real time there is sitting with some pretty specific functionality with the event streams that are coming in and the event hub. So an event hub might be used to fire data across and also to read data. So looking good, Alison?
Yeah, pretty exciting.
Yeah, okay. So let's get on to, we are talking about DP-700, which is obviously the Fabric Data Engineer exam. So if we get on to tips about creating that and what we're going to do. So do you advise anything just generally, exams in general, Alison, about hands-on practice?
Yeah, I mean, not everybody, we're not all great test takers, right? I'm more of a learn by doing kind of a person. So the hands-on practice for me is key. There's some fantastic resources available to go through, and you can go to Microsoft Learn and download the materials and log into the labs and actually, like you said, Marty, right? If you haven't got access to an event stream in your day-to-day world, go into the hands-on practices that Microsoft have available. There's lots of event streams to play with. Because for me, if I've done it and I've actually built a real-time event stream, when I get to that question on the exam, I'm like, how did that look? I can remember it a lot more than if it's just a concept that I've read or heard you and I talking about, right? So
Cool. So one of the things I like is the actual study guides and some of the resources that Microsoft Learn makes available. And obviously there's, you work through those yourself at your own pace. But I just wanted to point one particular one out. So as well as certifications that obviously people pay for and take them, and that's great, Microsoft have also got something called applied skills, which are like certifications, but like you can take them in your own time. They're very similar to exams. They won't cost you anything at all. And they normally have about a 2-hour time limit, but you can just take them on your own laptop. And there's things on a lake house, and there's one specifically on real-time integration. So if you were to work through all the Learn modules about real-time and then go and take the applied skill, that might give you some really good hands-on practice. They're not massively difficult, and I wouldn't worry about not getting through them the first time, because you can repeat them and do different things, but they will give you some real world problems and things to solve if you've not actually got the ability to work with a client who's doing real-time ingestion. And that goes for a lot of things as well. So have you used Microsoft Learn yourself much, Alison?
Yeah, well, like I said, I used to be a Microsoft certified trainer, so I've it wasn't too long ago that I left that space, and Microsoft recently transitioned all of the Microsoft certified training materials. Used to be like paper books, and now they've just moved it all online. So if you take any course with a Microsoft certified trainer now, the materials are basically just Microsoft Learn. So Microsoft have done a really fantastic job with the MS Learn site, and there's I love the content. Some of the courses are better than others, but they've got videos, they've got labs, they've got this will be part of that. So lots of things, lots of ways to learn for different learning styles, and then links out, and it's updated, which is really crucial with this content as well, right? Because as you said, Marty, soon we're going to have more options available, and so there's constantly evolutions and changing.
A very good point about the really heavyweight books, Alison. I'm glad they're not around. Well, they obviously buy heavyweight books now, but I've got a collection of heavyweight books collecting dust in my cabinet. So having digital learning resources is pretty good. And there's lots of sample projects as well that you can delve into, like the real-time sources that Microsoft make available. There's a lot of sample projects that they make available too. So what have we got coming up next, Alison?
Well, we're nearing the end of the session, and I think there's a little bit of delay for those of you that are joining us live. So now's the time to pop your questions in the chat, and while we go through this next bit. So any questions that you've got for Marty or myself, about what we've covered today in terms of ingesting and transforming your data in Microsoft Fabric, or any questions on tips for preparing for the exam, anything relevant for today, just pop those through. Tomorrow, join us. I think it's same time, same place for episode 3. Marty, do you know who's going to be presenting that one?
I certainly do. I will be doing it with Greg Lowe. So Greg's a Microsoft regional director. He's been concentrated on a SQL Server for a long time. Knows data well. Writes a
You're
lot
in
of
good
very
hands with those two. Yeah, it'll be a good session. So
knows a lot about monitoring optimization. He's a very good resource, but one of the things I did want to point out here, Alison, is so today's session will be available on demand. And the 4 sessions that we see here, the first one that ran on Tuesday, and that was about implementing and managing analytics. This one here, which is ingesting and transforming data. Tomorrow's one, which is monitoring and optimizing solutions. And even next week's, which will be a good one to go to if you watch the other 3. They're all live, obviously, but they're all available on demand as well. So they'll be uploaded to the YouTube site very, very shortly as we finish this, and they'll be available for people to go and browse at their leisure. Same time, same place. Just head in and watch us all.
Yeah.
So another note about the FabCon event. It's around the same time as it was last year. Starts 31st of March. I think that might be a Sunday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday are the main sessions. But there's also pre-con sessions before and after. So pre-con and post-con workshops. I think they might be called workshops rather than pre-cons and post-cons. But yeah, they are definitely good value for anyone who wants to attend. I think they cover a wide range of things, and there's some really great presenters, not only people from the product groups themselves, some of the MVPs that do great blogging around Fabric, Power BI, ingestion, monitoring, all that sort of thing will be there, and they will answer your questions. Do you think you might make it over this year at all, Alison?
No, unfortunately, I can't make it this year. I'm expecting my first child around that time, so I'll be otherwise occupied. But definitely coming for year 3, because I know it's going to get a year 3 because it's awesome. So yeah.
Oh, very good. So there's a new Fabric person coming into the world, and Alison, is there?
Yeah. Yep. We're gonna have another new Fabric expert, and she's gonna be teaching me all the things, because as kids do, they know more about technology. So
yes, kids seem to pick it up very well. I know mine use their devices very happily, and even teach me a few things, which is pretty good. But yeah, like I said before, the community zone at this Fabric event is pretty much second to none, as are the workshops, as are the sessions. You've got access to product teams, various people. If you turn up looking for information about, say, ingestion, and there's no one there to talk about ingestion, which is unlikely, you'll be definitely pointed in the right place and to the right people to get your questions answered. And feedback is good. Feedback for the product team is great. It helps make the product better by seeing scenarios that have happened in the real world and how customers are making use of ingestion techniques, Fabric notebooks, all that sort of things that we've talked about today. We can create a better product going forward. So do you want to just sum up with the discount code for the exam there, Alison?
Yep. So FabCon, register within the next 2 weeks to get your early bird pricing, 50% discount for the exam, DP-700, ends at the end of March. So get in quick. I'm not sure. It says limited time offer while supplies last, so that they might run out. if you've got any questions and you're not joining us live, there's a couple of AKA links that you can type into your favorite web browser and get some exam resources to prepare for the exam going on to Microsoft Learn. And we've got a couple of questions coming
I just see them come through there, Alison. So I'll just read that for one of the ones I see there. What is the difference between mirroring and creating shortcuts? Any drawbacks to shortcuts? So basically, to sum up, mirroring data is taking data from a source system. So I'm going to use an example of a SQL Server database. So you might have a SQL Server database. You've got data constantly changing in your table, and you are essentially mirroring that, making a copy onto your source system. Now, we're not just pulling data across once. As data changes in the system, in the source system, it's immediately replicated to the to our Delta Parquet files on OneLake. So as data changes in the source, it's immediately replicated or mirrored, if you want a better word, onto the source system. That allows data to be kept up to date. Yeah, is there another question there, Alison? Can you see?
Well, just extension of that one. How is that different from a shortcut?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't cover the shortcuts. So how is that different from a shortcut? Okay, so a shortcut will just be static data. So for example, you've got a file. Let's say you've got a CSV file sitting in Azure storage, or it doesn't have to be Azure storage. It could be Amazon storage. You would point your OneLake folder at that particular file. And it would appear in your OneLake folder as though it was actually an item within OneLake itself. However, when you went to use that, you would actually pull the data, the static data, from the shortcut. Now, I guess the shortcut could, it could change, the data could change, and you would see the data, assuming you had the correct caching on, or you were or weren't caching. But you'd only see any kind of changes as you got data depending on your settings. Whereas with the mirroring, you're seeing the data get updated in real time. So similar kind of things, but definitely different. I'm sorry, have you got anything to answer that, Alison?
I was just thinking, I guess the drawbacks to shortcuts could be if you don't have great source control or governance, and as you say, if there's some changes or something. But yeah, I've played around briefly with shortcuts, and it's super easy, almost scarily so, and really handy to have those shortcuts sitting as though they're in the lakehouse and have them available across lots of different areas without having to replicate the data, which to me seems
cool. Hey, Alison, just before we go, because I think we're nearly at time, I just want to address a question I see here in the chat. So it says, I'm in the middle of DP-203 prep. What's your view on taking DP-203 in February? Okay, so obviously your mileage might vary here. That exam is scheduled to be retired. However, if you've done the prep and you're ready to take the exam, I'd go sit it. Take the exam, get your qualification, and then start looking at transitioning over to Fabric. I mean, people are still using Azure. It's not going away. It's still there. The skills you gain in DP-203 will be more than adequate, and they'll provide a great footing for us to move, or for you to move over to Fabric. Does that sound okay, Alison?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is with the ones that are current, the exams that are current, you've got the ability to renew that certification every year, I think it is. With the DP-203, you wouldn't have that, but nobody can take away the fact that you've passed that and you've got the certification and you've proven that you've got the base knowledge there. So if you've got the money and you're already, well on that trajectory, there's no harm in having that, and then also going for the the 700 as the next.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Alison. But anyway, it's been great presenting with you, Alison. So I'm in Australia, Alison's in New Zealand, and hopefully we'll see you again. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. So from me, goodbye. And from Alison, goodbye too. See you soon.